Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we get started, Third Place Books would like to acknowledge that we are in the unceded ancestral land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the Duwamish people and the land itself. So welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie. I'm your host for this evening, and I am so excited to be introducing Marcus Harrison Green and Mason Bryan here to discuss Marcus's collection, Readying to Rise. So before we get into the good stuff, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. As much as we miss having you all in the bookstore, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and for buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So I will be linking directly to books in chat all evening. So it will be super easy to go find them if you would like to. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in. All three of our locations are open, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in the store. Or if you're not local, we happily ship. And once again, we are so grateful for your support. While you're over on the website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the next few months. And if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. And we do have a pretty good time over on our social media platforms, so I definitely recommend you go see if there's anything there for you. Speaking of social media, if you would like to check out some of our past virtual events, you can find most of them on our YouTube channel, including this event within the next 48 hours. So if you'd like to see our other virtual events or share this one, go ahead and track us down over there. We are here for about an hour. And towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, please go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. We would love to know where you're from or your favorite latest read, but please, when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A so we can easily find them. So before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone of our commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of event attendees and our guest authors. So in chat and question spaces, please do lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. There are auto-generated closed captions available from the menu at the top or bottom of the screen. Go ahead and select the live transcript button to enable or disable them. And finally, should any technical issues arise, which it's the age of Zoom, it could happen, but we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them. And we really appreciate your patience and understanding. And I think that is all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce Marcus Harrison Green, the publisher of the South Seattle Emerald and a columnist with the Seattle Times. Growing up in South Seattle, he experienced firsthand the impact of one-dimensional stories on marginalized communities, which taught him the value of authentic narratives. His dedication to telling stories with nuance, complexity, and multidimensionality with the hope of advancing social change led him to become a writer and found the South Seattle Emerald. He co-hosts the podcast Life on the Margins, and in 2020 was awarded the Seattle Human Rights Commission's Individual Human Rights Leader Award. In his collection, Readying to Rise, he bears sharp witness to the Black Lives Matter movement, his own journey into and out of religious faith, his grandmother's lessons, his battle with bipolar disorder, human mortality, blatant hypocrisy, and so much more. Joining us in conversation, we welcome Mason Bryan, Crosscut's Associate Opinion Editor. His writing has appeared in the Santiago Times, Huffington Post, and Real Change News. So thank you both so very much for being here. I'm so excited to listen in on this conversation. If you need anything, of course, give me a shout. I will be listening. Same goes for any of you in the audience. I will be in chat. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage on to our authors. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Allie.
Thanks, Allie.
Wonderful intro. Thank you.
Marcus, good evening.
Good evening to you, Mr. Mason. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be in conversation with you. I know we've had the opportunity to have many conversations over the last couple of years, and I've learned a lot from them, and I'm grateful for our friendship and our continued dialogue. I want to shout out and thank Third Place Books really quick, a first-rate bookstore where you should buy all of your books, especially this one that we're about to discuss. Yeah, it should. It's a great place. So, Marcus, I want to set the stage a little bit about the collection. Ali mentioned a few of the themes that it touches on, and my God, it's a lot. It's a book that spans almost 30 pieces, or a little over 30 pieces, I think. Yeah. And it's an intense array of essays, of columns that you've published, throughout Seattle media. And there's also what I started to think of as secular sermons. You can quibble with that if you want later, but there's a lot going on in here. And if anyone in the audience has read Marcus before, and I'm sure many of you have, he doesn't write about rainbows and unicorns, don't you, Marcus?
No. Where would the fun be in that? But yeah.
Exactly. So tonight is about engaging, I guess you could say, the more serious, somber parts of our minds and hearts, because we're going to be talking about things that Marcus thinks hard about and writes really well about. And this includes racism and violence and identity and Marcus's own struggles with faith and his own struggles with mental illness. I do want to just make a note at the outset that we may touch on suicide at some point. Just want folks to be prepared for that if it comes up. But yeah, Marcus, why don't we start with a little bit of table setting about the book. So I mentioned all of these topics that you touch. Theme-wise, thematically, what occurred to me as I was reading that there are sort of two tracks going on here, and sometimes those tracks overlap or collide. On the one hand, there are pieces that are concerned with internal havoc, and that's a word I think you use at one point. And so in that camp, you've got pieces about mental illness, your struggles with mental illness, about self-destructive behavior, about your own struggles with faith. And then on the other hand, in the external havoc realm, the second side of this coin, you're concerned with havoc or chaos that's occurring in society. So here we're talking, mostly about racism and violence and both the interpersonal and structural manifestations of these. So you've got those two themes, and in some of the pieces, Marcus, those two themes collide. But my question for you about going into this project was whether you planned deliberately for the book to coalesce around these themes, or did something surprise you about going back and rereading the pieces and arranging them into this text?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Mason. And I do want to shout you out that you did edit probably about 25% of this book in terms of the essays that do appear in here. So much love to you for that. I'll say in terms of how the book, came together and the curation and all that other stuff, it really was sort of the whole line about hoping that the dots connect at the end of everything. I think that's a quote that Steve Jobs of all people gave. With me, when I looked back at my writing, it really was a theme of evolution, if you will, and a theme of transformation, both internally, as you say, that internal havoc, and the external world as well. I was writing many of these essays at a time period where I'm going through, a crisis of faith, a crisis of do I want to even continue to live? Do I want to accept that I have a bipolar disorder and it's a disorder that I'll have for the rest of my life? Do I want to even continue to write because it's so damn hard so many times? And then you juxtapose that with the fact that we're living in a world where there was so much in terms of cries out against racial injustice, patriarchy, and so on and so forth. I think at the beginning of near the beginning of the book, it's an essay about Eric Garner dying, and Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. And then towards the end, right, it's with George Floyd, and it's like, what has really changed in that span a decade. And it was surprising somewhat at how not to pat myself on the back, but how well, I guess, these essays stood up in terms of the test of time, where it was like, wow, I really could just take a name, scrub a name out, and I could have written that yesterday. So yeah. Yeah,
there is a kind of disturbing symmetry to some of the pieces, especially around the racial violence stuff. And we'll get into that, but a little more about you and your relationship to writing. So in almost all of these pieces, even the more traditional journalistic writing, you invoke the self, often extremely explicitly. And some of this, of course, comes with the material, to be sure. Right. Even in much of the outward facing essays, you often reveal vulnerable and significant parts about yourself. Mm-hmm. When you think about writing, has it always been a means of exploring both yourself and the society?
Yeah, and I think it's been a natural way to process things. When I was growing up, so I grew up in Rainier Beach, which for those people who don't know, I'm assuming most do. It's in one of the more diverse areas of the city. Grew up around the Black community here, and yet when my parents chose to send me to school, it was mainly to private schools, where I was was certainly a racial minority, and so you're going through life growing up feeling that you're trying to, at a time when you're just trying to find out who you are as a young person, and yet you're sort of straddling these worlds. You don't quite always feel accepted in one or the other. I remember coming back, I remember riding the bus, to my private school, and being, made fun of the kids on there, and then, getting into a fight with one of the white kids, and, school administration, school staff not doing anything, even when I told them what happened. And then I remember coming home that same day, and you had a kid who thought I was too good or whatever, was picking on me, and then, fighting me. And so there were so many days of where you would get into fights all the time. But at the same time, you were trying not to burden your parents with what was going on. I come from a working class family. They were working 2 jobs a piece to make sure that I could go to this private school and, get what they deemed, and it was, a good, at least academic education. And so you learn how to try to handle things on your own, as a preteen or a teenager. You learn to try to do your best to cope with the onslaught, right, of rage that you feel around certain things, and wanting to act out and respond in certain ways, but at the same time being cognizant of who you are as a Black male in society even then, and how you're treated, and how you're treated by others. And so for me, writing was that sort of that one tool that I could always hold on to, that I could always that was always there for me, right? And I'm a natural, I guess, unshy introvert, you might say, that I can go and play myself on a Zoom event, but like I need 10 hours afterwards of isolation. And so writing was the thing that was always the refuge for me in terms of an activity to do that also wasn't that also wasn't destructive.
Yeah, that's interesting. But at some point, writing became the thing that you wanted to do with purpose. You wanted to make it your vocation. You talk about in the book working at a hedge fund in Los Angeles, going from that, and then back to the South Seattle of your youth, wanting to become a writer, wanting to start this media organization, South Seattle Emerald. What was happening? How were you nurturing that intellectual side, that artistic side of you when you were working in finance, driving fancy cars in LA?
Yeah, I met some of those fancy cars when you're on the Joe Metro, but
Oh,
you
my
know,
bad.
I was still always write. I mean, writing is it's always my first love. It was, and it was also a way to process. You have to understand the hedge fund world is a very, very, very uh, let's just be real, racist, predominantly white, predominantly male, very misogynistic, very, let's just say that there are definitely people doing a lot of illegal substances that, in that particular world. And so, again, I encountered another place that was in some ways a place of captivity, right? As it was growing up with school. And so, I mean, it was by choice, and it was a trade-off in the sense of I was trading my well-being, quite frankly, somewhat of my integrity, my artistic pursuits for a lucrative paycheck. And it just became too much. And writing, again, was that tool that was always there when somebody had said something untoward about you, about your race, about, we're trying to make sure we're trying to make sure that there are not too many of you up in here because we don't want Harlem, or, are dropping the M word on you like it's rolling off the tongue. Yeah, that it was easy to answer your question. It was easy to keep writing as a core, tenet and element of myself. It was easy to keep it as for lack of a better term, a companion that would never fail me.
Yeah. You mentioned both the private high school and this hedge fund, high finance workplace. And you describe, in the book, the experience basically of being a Black guy in predominantly white spaces. Once you get to the hedge fund, there's also the class element, or I'm sure at the private school too, there's the class element. And you write about how your sense of self was, how to put it, somewhat defined or somewhat cultivated within the confines of these race and class structures. And you talk about this sense of like never being able to be good enough. You're never rich enough in the hedge fund context. Mm-hmm. Or like you say, you go home to your community after being at the predominantly white high school, and people are giving you shit for doing that. Who do you think you are, kind of thing. So there's a lot of existential confusion, I guess. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I say existential confusion and just regular run-of-the-mill confusion, right? It's who are you, right? But it's also like, what are you supposed to be doing, right? What is it that is going to get me approval in these situations? What is it that is going to allow me to be quote unquote successful, right? And it becomes a thing where you are subordinating the search for your own personality, the search for your own truth, really, right? To live somebody else's idea of who you are, what you are, right? I mean, so many times you're told in those situations, well, you're one of the good ones, are essentially because you don't speak out as much, or speak out about wrong, essentially, or you can grin and bear it, or you can be called the N-word as a you can take that kind of thing, versus just trying to be yourself and trying to find yourself in who you are, right? I mean, it's the old adage, like, know thyself. And so I think, especially during those formative stages in my life, and sort of ping-ponging between the class and race differences of school versus growing up in my community, and then still having that same sort of mentality when I went and was in the investment world. There was always a a feel of, this is a facade, this is an artifice, I know this isn't true. And there starts to be a void that forms, right, between the person who you believe that you truly are and the person that is presented to the outside world. And as I kept, to be honest with you, as I kept working in the investment world, I kept seeing more and more people willing to live a lie and believe the lie and to adopt the lie as their life. And I kept thinking about, wow, you have all these trappings of wealth and, fame for some folks. And yet it's the existence itself is a miserable one. I think there's a saying that I've come to repeat to myself quite often whenever I'm feeling nostalgic for those days and the salary of a hedge fund. And it's like, we're punished by the lives we lead. We are punished by the lives we lead, and meaning, the lives that we sometimes choose to lead, knowing that they are in conflict with the people that we actually are in terms of the people we truly are, our authentic selves, if you will.
Yeah. You write in the book about the first 7 years at the Emerald. So you're running this startup media organization, basically, which I might add has grown into a truly vital, often influential forum for discussion on underreported issues and community celebrations of all types. And I know it's going to continue to grow, it sounds like.
Thank you.
So that's fantastic. But speaking to the early years, you left the life of wealth because it sounds like, the laundry list of reasons. But there was something about, the shallowness of seeking wealth, of having more money than, what to do with, that doesn't nurture the soul, that doesn't make a person feel fulfilled. However, you go back to Seattle and you start the Emerald and you enjoy success pretty quickly. You earn accolades for your writing, for the work that the Emerald was doing in the community. You're sought after speaker, sought after writer. But in the background, you're struggling, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I tell you, those first 3-4 years of the Emerald were extremely challenging. We had when you're trying to start anything, and you're the only person who believes in it, you and your family essentially, you don't have a lot of margin for error. And I didn't, I put majority of my savings into the Emerald when it first started. I was a janitor, I was editor-in-chief, publisher, tech person. I did emptied the water tanks, like everything, right? And like any startup at that point, you're inundated with a lot. And I found myself doing so much in many ways to just sort of as a distraction and escape from what was, going on with me internally in my life, meaning that I was starting to have really bad issues with, handling my mental health. And that was around the time that I was diagnosed a second time with bipolar disorder, and I didn't want to accept it. And so you start to fill that void with abuse of alcohol, abuse of drugs, and you don't want to tell, you don't want to let people down at that point, right? You have your family who believes in you, you have a community who has started to believe in what you're doing and your work, and yet you're empty. You're starting to feel empty. You're starting to feel like it takes 3 bottles of wine a night and you know, some uppers or whatever to get you going in the morning and to make sure you can, you know, go 24/7. And you start to, you know, you set yourself aside for, and you can't set yourself aside for that long, you know, meaning, I know it's fashionable to say self-care, but hell, just just maintenance and checking in with yourself and being okay with, you know, with yourself. And, you know, unfortunately that led to a break about, you know, year 4 or so of the Emerald. That's when I, you know, took, we call it, I guess, a sabbatical now, working for the Seattle Times for a year, because I just could not handle, I truly just couldn't handle everything. I had I remember being, and I think I talk about this in an essay in the book, I remember being at this event with like 400, 500 people there to celebrate the Emerald, and people are coming up and shaking my hand and slapping me on the back. And, you know, there's a smile plastered on my face, but inside, it's like you're literally dying. You're literally dying. You know, it's not too long after that, I had attempted to take my own life. And I talk about this in the book as well. My mother asked me, you know, can you try to love yourself? And I said, I don't know. I've never tried. And, you know, that was, you know, things didn't change overnight. Nothing is overnight, but that set me on the road to wanting to recover an idea and identity and authenticity of me and who I was, and to try to realize that there's no substitute for having a firm foundation in terms of who you are as a human being. Yeah.
Well, we're all overjoyed, Marcus, that you have, you know, continued with your recovery and that you've made it to the other side, man. I mean, really, which is not to say that the battle is over. As you write in the book, you know, mental health, self-maintenance, self-care, is a daily discipline.
Yeah, there are no, and I think as I say, there are no perfect days, but there are better days. And I mean, hell, there's no perfect days for anybody, but it's always just good to remember.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that is perhaps connected to the mental health issues, what that struck me in the book, you, in at least 2 pieces, you describe a horrific encounter with the police when you were 13 years old. You were stopped for jaywalking or something.
Ostensibly, yeah.
Ostensibly. Thrown against the hood of the car, and this police officer makes a vicious, violent threat about your mother. And so from a very early age, the fact of violence, state violence, let's call it, is not theoretical to you.
Right.
It's made, you know, painfully real. How did you understand that violence as a young teenager, and has it, or how has it influenced the purpose of your writing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it happens to you that young, you no longer have a naivete about life, quite frankly. Yeah. You are, I mean, we all get struck with reality at some point in our lives, but I think especially being a Black American, you're struck with that from a very young age, whether out of situations that happen to family and friends, or whether situations that happen to you as an individual. And so for me, right, I mean, it was that rage of knowing that I could do nothing. I literally could do nothing at all. Or at least nothing that would make the situation that much worse, right? Especially at that young age. And so there's a level of powerlessness that you feel. And it sticks with you for a long time, you know, whether it was here in Seattle, whether it was when I was down in Thousand Oaks or Westlake Village or whatever, it was hard to not be resigned to that, right? And I think, if I'm honest with you, Mason, and I have been the entire time, just so you know, I would say that was also part and parcel of why I left the hedge fund world and why I left sort of those jobs or occupations where you're presented with a trade-off, right? You can get these golden handcuffs, so to speak, and these trinkets, as long as you don't create waves. And so for me, that was, writing has always been a way as well that you can actually try to affect change and impact change, right? Whether it's James Baldwin or Toni Morrison or Nikki Giovanni, right? They all have the through line of they write to change the world. And for me, that's the reason why I write, is so that, I have a voice and a platform over at the Seattle Times that can maybe get to readers who wouldn't normally encounter certain issues, or wouldn't necessarily encounter certain communities. And yet, if I can do even just one thing to make improve somebody's life or lot or station or make somebody think, right? I mean, that's the thing that I think writers can really do, especially nowadays where so many people react, because whether it's social media, whether it's just how fast and frenzied the world moves right now. If you can make somebody contemplate and reflect and sit with themselves and probe themselves and examine not just themselves, right? I mean, we all say it, right? Aristotle talks about the unexamined life, of course, but what about the unexamined society, right? Why not extend that examination from the individual into the society with which we live? And that, to me, is the writer's job, and always has been and always will be, right? And sometimes their impact is delayed, right? They might posthumously have written something that that gets people's attention, and that's okay. But you just have to continue to put it out there. I think it's James Baldwin said it best when they had asked him why he writes, and he said, "I write because I know that I hope that there is someday that there is somebody who is facing great adversity, our trauma, our terror. They will go back and they'll be looking through the rummage of the past to find words of encouragement and love and kindness, and they might spark an idea." And to me, that's, writers don't get the immediate attention or affection, if you will, of rock stars and musicians, right? I mean, when you encounter our writer's work, it's usually in isolation with individuals. And so it's, to me, though, I think that's the best summation of what a writer is, not only what they are supposed to do, but what we should be doing with our work.
Yeah. By the way, all my rock stars are writers, Marcus.
Oh, well then.
I wanna make this a little concrete and speak briefly. I can't believe we're almost running out of time before the audience Q&A, but I wanna try and make this a bit concrete. And I would also be remiss if I didn't bring up at least one piece that you and I worked on together. Mm-hmm. And really, I'm dotting this guy's I's and crossing his T's, let's be real. But let's go back to last winter. I think it's February 2020 or January 2020. And there's a shooting downtown between two. A shootout is ignited downtown on 3rd Avenue. And it results in the death of one person. 7 or 8 others are injured. A 9-year-old child is involved. And, it was a dramatic moment in Seattle. And you came to me and you said, I got material no one else has. I know one of the accused shooters. His name is William Tolliver. So can you go back to that moment last winter, Marcus, and tell me, what were you thinking? And did you feel an obligation, because you knew this guy, to write the piece the way you did?
Yeah, I'll say that was it was a hard piece to write, but I felt it was also a necessary piece. Too often, I mean, it still happens now, obviously, when these things happen, when shootings happen, and especially when they involve, Black males as the accused, it is so often that they are automatically deems, this evil hellspawn and so on and so forth. And the purpose of the article was not to heroicize or provide salvation or whatever for the individual who was accused, but it was to say that he is a human being. And these are the things, this is how, he grew up in a situation that he really literally probably didn't have much of a chance in terms of like.
What was your relationship to him, Marcus?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So my brother, DeMarcus, it's his cousin. William Tolliver is his cousin. Yeah. And so he had grown up around our house and so forth. We would see him here and there. We spoken to him. And when I remember just seeing his face on, I think it was Como or Cairo or one of the news stations. And there's just this feeling of grand sorrow, knowing that his life was pretty much done at this point, knowing also of sorrow for the folks he was accused as well of shooting, of course, since there was somebody who was killed, and he was, by all accounts, was not actually trying to shoot that person, but bullets, when you throw guns around haphazardly, hazard happens. So I just remember writing that piece, wanting the city to know that, hey, this is how we sort of create these situations many times, when we do not address some of the root causes, when we do not address some of the true issues that are going on, when we don't have preventative measures, when we neglect an area and communities of the city, and the only time we do pay attention to them is when it's time to lock them up. I wanted to, they say complicate the narrative, but I just wanted to present the narrative as it is, like the reality and complex and the nuance of it. And the fact that at the end of the day, right, perhaps this person's life could have, not to say that he doesn't have agency in the situation, he does, and he did. But to say that there are things that could have been in place prior that we as a city are punished for, right? It reminded me so much, sorry, man, seeing him and thinking about him now, it just reminded me so much of the line in Romeo and Juliet, when I think the king or sheriff or whatever, he's seeing both of these bodies, and the Capulets and Montagues, this antagonistic family, they're finally like have seen the error of their ways, and he's like, all are punished here, meaning the entirety, everybody. And that's when I looked at that situation with William and the carnage down there on 3rd Avenue. That's the line that kept coming, we are all punished, meaning that we are responsible for, in some ways, right, for what has happened, for the lives we allow to turn down that path without any opportunity, and the lives we give opportunities to.
Well, I think it is an example, Marcus, the piece of you operating at the height of your powers. And I think too, it speaks to the power of opinion journalism. Hot takes and think pieces abound, and they certainly did after that incident. But
I do want to say that I had a really good editor too for that.
Well, I appreciate that. But I think that your instinct to want to tell this story about someone you knew who was involved in this horrific thing, and the way you did it, and you're always reporting, so there were other voices in that piece, not just your own,
right,
who brought a degree of depth and forcefulness to the argument that is I see a note that reference make us think, yes, yeah, for anyone who knows Marcus knows that he this guy can drop references in any moment, in any situation whatsoever. But anyway, I digress. You all can go back and read the piece. I hope you will. It's quite good. Let me ask one more question before we go to the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about one more that you published with Crosscut, and this came weeks after the murder of George Floyd. and you wrote a piece about attending a massive march that started at Othello Park and headed south from there. It was an extraordinary day for a lot of reasons. But in this essay that you wrote, you called it, or we called it, "I Glimpsed Hope at a South Seattle Park." Mm-hmm. And at the top of the essay, you make an allusion to a column you had written 5 years earlier for the Seattle Times. And in that column, you were reflecting on the deaths of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. And you were decrying what you called the tragic familiarity of the deaths of Black people by police. And that earlier piece from 5 years earlier, was despairing. I think the piece you had attended a march or a vigil, and you decided that night that was the last one you were going to attend, and and that was a decision made because of the cynicism and despair inspired by this tragic familiarity. It makes total sense. But 5 years later, George Floyd happens, the world changes again, and you go out to this march, and you walk away from that with a slightly different outlook than previous marches. And that's not to say there wasn't despair. I've no doubt that there was tremendous amounts of it. Hope and the possibility that things can be better, either for yourself or for society, is a theme, I think, that animates Readying to Rise, all of the pieces in this book. It's not a cheap hope. It's not a flimsy hope. It's hope as deep conviction. It's hope as a secular kind of faith. Can you talk about that piece, about that moment, and where your head's at right now?
Yeah, that also was a difficult piece to write, because I did have this sort of grand epiphany, if you will, of, I tell you, like, prior to the uprisings and marches with George Floyd, as you said, I very much was inclined to never march in another march again. There's only so many times you can march with the names and faces of Black men, women, people, and nothing happens. And it just started to be the whole thing about what's the line that is it stupidity that is just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result?
Insanity.
It's insanity. Okay, well, either
stupidity too.
Yeah, it's synonymous oftentimes. No, but and so for me to realize that I'm a very secular person, but I do go to a Unitarian church, just so people know. But for me to go to a park in South Seattle where there must have been 5,000 to 7,000 people there from all walks of life. I never saw Othello Park in South Seattle filled to the brim like that before, ever. And to sort of feel rapturous in some way, to feel that, oh, this is what this looks like, right? Because it was more of a reminder to me, not of, okay, are we going to get these swift policy changes and all that? It was a greater reminder to me. It was a reminder that all the bad in life that we have, really, literally, most of the bad that we have in life, it's not through magic or some, entity, cursing us or whatever. Most of the bad we have in life, what it might be, is human beings, right? But whether it's fascism, patriarchy, racism, and so forth, these are human constructions, right? So that means they can be undone and dismantled by human beings, right? So wherever you have human beings, you will have grand tragedy. You will have horror. You will have despondence. But wherever you have human beings, right, you also have potential for hope and love and kindness. That's what seeing that reminded me of, Everybody on this call, in the audience today, everybody in, you, me, Mason, everyone, right? Wherever human beings are gathered, there's opportunity for hope. And I never lose faith in that, ever.
You fill us with a lot of it, Marcus. So thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Let me turn to some of the audience questions here. One anonymous attendee asks, "You are such a great community builder. What advice do you have for building and maintaining community connections?"
That's a good question. I would say first it starts by listening. And actively listening. What is a person trying to tell you? What are they? Why are they coming to you? What is their fundamental need? And then I'd say, try doing your best to, not take action in any sort of savioristic type mindset, but try to see, like, how can we work on this together? How can we work on this as a community? And then, nurturing those relationships, like as you would any other relationship. You're trying to stay away from making those relationships transactional, right? You're not only visiting when, you're not only trying to visit somebody the best day of their life or the worst day of their life. You're trying to visit people and connect with them and talk with them, during the mundane days of their life. You're trying the best you can to be a consistent presence in their life. Now that, I'm not saying that that's going to be every day. Obviously, people have different schedules and so forth, but you're doing your best to make sure that you're calling them into community, and that, again, you're trying to stick away from it just being transactional in nature. So
here's a question, Marcus, that allows us to nerd out a little bit. It's a bit of a complicated question, but I'm gonna throw it.
I trust you, Mason.
Miles wants to know about your development as a stylist. How did you come to write the particular sentences you write? And what's the relationship between the broader rhetorical goals you have of any and the tiny aesthetic decisions that you make line by line?
Yeah, well, I know thank you for the question, Miles. And also, Mason, I know that you've been with me when I've been making some of those decisions. I think for me, I really, calling myself a capital W writer, I really love the fact that writers can animate language and make it try to jump off the page and try to make somebody, I want people to remember some of the sentences that I wrote, when you're trying to sort of put information, if you will, or make them, or put something thought-provoking. I want to try to put it into a sugary capsule, if you will, so that, meaning a line of a sentence or two or a paragraph, so that people will remember it and can also just, ponder it. I look at it, in the sense that if I look at style in a way, right, that I hate to use sports analogies, right, but there's a basketball player like Michael Jordan or LeBron James or whatever, right? They can just easily lay it up and have a boring, game, and it'll get the job done. But right, they go out and they try to put on a show, not just for not just for themselves, but for the people who are viewing them. And for me, I look at it this way: if I'm asking you as a reader to take 5 to 10 minutes from your life, or 15 minutes, or whatever it is, to read something that I wrote, then you deserve my absolute best, because you can be spending that time with family, I don't know, looking at TikTok videos, looking at anything else. And so you deserve my absolute best. And for me, trying to make sure that at the very least, that even if you agree with what I'm saying or not, that the reading itself is an enjoyable experience. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. We're all competing with Disney Plus and Ted so, and all the rest. All right, let's see. Javier has a question about what local resources do you suggest to support community mental health? That's the question. The first part, there's a word I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I think this might be a bit of a swerve, but I would say definitely supporting a lot of our local parks, like a place like Kubota Garden, which is my favorite place in Seattle, dang near on the earth. A lot of, especially in a city like ours, being able to be attuned with nature, being able to be attuned with the outdoors, being able to have third places, no pun intended, I know is very much a necessity for me in my mental health and in my recovery. And when I am at wit's end, or I feel myself in a very either a manic tornado or a depressive spiral, being able to walk amongst beauty is imperative for me.
So I think, well, let me ask one more question and then we'll let Ali tap back in. I want to talk a little bit about the Emerald, South Seattle Emerald, is moving on to a new phase. You're stepping away as editor-in-chief,
right?
Retaining your post as publisher. Some growth is on the way. Thank goodness. You did that for 7 years. Oversaw news organization. That was so vital to have been included in the media ecosystem. Without it, there's a gigantic void. I mean, I can't believe we never had it. But what I'm curious about is what seeing the city from the perspective of a journalist, maybe a community leader, you could say, has what sort of insights or lessons has that experience yielded about the city of Seattle itself? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I mean, I guess I could go with it's now becomes almost a cliche that that the city probably isn't as progressive as it claims to be, and obviously there's that. But I'd say that in many ways, and maybe this sounds a bit corny, but being able to see it from the vantage point of a journalist, where I get to talk to people I would have no business otherwise, needing to speak with, and at the very ground level, I get to talk to people like Ali Reeves, who is a kinship caregiver, meaning a grandmother who is raising her 2 grandchildren, and I get to help tell her story and be a part of her life, and I get to help in some minute way, show her life to other people who wouldn't know her. And now she's in a situation where so many people had wanted to help her and her children out, her grandchildren out, who she raises, that they paid, $5,000 for her grandson's braces. And one person sends $250 out of his retirement check every month to her to make ends meet. Like, I get to see stuff like that. Like, I get to see people coming together, mutual aid networks and so forth, when they had when the onset of the pandemic, and they didn't wait for government, they didn't wait for anybody, they just put stuff together and handed checks to people, right? It's the irony in some ways that being a journalist has made me less cynical, because I get to see, I get to see people coming together. I get to see what humanity is capable of, even though it's in a very micro, maybe, a micro view of it. But heck, these are many times, these are where it's communities right now, especially, I think, where, when we are looking for hope and so forth, and not necessarily finding it at the national level, I think where where we can find repositories of hopes are here. And so, yeah, I'd say that's how being a journalist and reporter in the city has allowed me to view the city a little bit differently.
Marcus, my friend, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope everyone goes out imbibes Readying to Rise, reads it, savors it, continues to follow the work of Marcus at the Seattle Times, at the Emeralds. Please read Crosscut too. And yeah, thanks for this, Marcus. It's been fun.
It's been great, Mason. I gotta say, I gotta write another book because it's, you know, it gives us an excuse to get together now that you're no longer my main editor. But
I miss it every day. I miss it every day.
Yeah, and just thank you all for being here tonight. And I know you could have done anything else in the world, and it was a privilege to have you with us tonight. So thank you.
All right, I am back. So hello, everyone. It is about time for us to call it an evening, but I'm just going to take this last moment to say thank you both so very much for being here. This was such a wonderful conversation. To all of our audience members, thank you so much for tuning in. We are so happy to have you here, always, always. For those of you who would like to get your hands on copies of Readying to Rise, go ahead and follow the link. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and relink just because there's been some chatting in the chat, which is great. So go ahead and follow that link to go check it out. Let us know, of course, what you thought of this event in person or on social media. We always love to hear from you. Marcus and Mason, one more huge, huge thank you for being here. This was such a pleasure. And I think that at this point, it's time for the awkward waving. So good night, everybody, and we'll see you soon.